Notre Dame dropped from number 9 to number 10 in the college football playoff rankings, and now the Irish are one conference championship game away from either making or missing the college football playoffs. We're breaking down the bracket, the committee's logic, and why Notre Dame fans are going to be holding their breath on Saturday, coming up on this live edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in to Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018. I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish for the last 5 years. Thank you so much for joining us live on Tuesday night following the latest CFP rankings, or if you're catching us on Wednesday, December 3rd, thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. And before we dive in, please be sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. And don't forget to submit your questions for this Friday mailbag in the YouTube comments, on X at Locked On Irish, or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. All right, the penultimate college football playoff rankings are officially here, and the committee has dropped the Irish from number 9 to number 10 after finishing the regular season on a 10-game winning streak, all by double digits. Even though Notre Dame has effectively submitted its resume, championship weekend is going to play a massive role in determining whether the Irish actually make the cut on Selection Sunday, which is less than a week from today. And here's what we've got coming up for you tonight. First, we're going to go through the latest top 15 and map out how the bracket looks heading into conference championship weekend. Then we're going to break down what the CFP committee chairman had to say about Notre Dame's standing, and there were some really interesting comments in there. We're going to explain what it really tells us about how the Irish are viewed going into this final stretch. Then we're going to lay out the exact scenarios that need to unfold on Saturday for Notre Dame to have a real shot. We'll also go through my own top 12, explain where I think the committee got it right and what they got wrong. And later on, I do have some thoughts on how these rankings have been covered lately, from national media to politicians getting in the mix as of late, because the politicking, the public campaigning, and the weird amount of vitriol directed at Notre Dame has gotten pretty gross. It's become an unfortunate byproduct of the sport we all love, and we're going to dig into why this week has really felt so miserable as a college football fan. But let's get into it. Let's take a look at the college football playoff rankings, the last ones before the official ones that come out on Sunday. Those will be the final rankings. Here's how the top 15 shakes out. So at number 1, you've got Ohio State. At 2, you've got Indiana. 3, Georgia. 4, Texas Tech. They moved up one, as did Oregon, who is now at number 5. And Ole Miss moved up to number 6 because Texas A&M moved down to number 7 following their loss to Texas. At 8, you've got Oklahoma. And then at 9, which is where Notre Dame has been the last 3 weeks, you now have Alabama after they were able to hold on and beat Auburn this past Saturday, and Notre Dame dropped from number 9 to number 10, which right now, and what it's going to be on Sunday, is the last at-large spot to make the college football playoff. At number 11, you've got BYU. At number 12, Miami. 13, you've got Texas. They moved up 3 spots after beating Texas A&M. 14 is Vanderbilt, and 15 is Utah. So if the playoffs started today, the 12 seed, which is going to be a group of 5 conference champion, would then head to Oregon in that first round matchup, and then Alabama would take on Oklahoma in a rematch, but this one would be in Norman. And then you have the 11 seed, which is going to be another conference champion to be determined this weekend, heading to take on Ole Miss. And then we could get a rematch between Notre Dame and Texas A&M, but this time it would be in Kyle Field. So that's how it looks today. But then after the rankings came out, you're thinking, okay, is Notre Dame safe? Does this mean the Notre Dame-Miami debate is done? Why did Alabama jump Notre Dame? So they bring in Hunter Yurachek, who is the chairman of the College Football Playoff Committee. And he had some things to say, none of which they didn't make a whole lot of sense. And he had this long response about why they picked Alabama over Notre Dame. It was the first question that Reese Davis asked him. It was one of the most notable things in the entire rankings. And then Yurachek goes on this long rant about how the committee has been comparing Oklahoma, Notre Dame, and Alabama for weeks now, and I think he said it was a really rigorous debate and used all kinds of words. And then he started going over the play-by-play of the Iron Bowl on Saturday as a way to justify their decision to move Alabama over Notre Dame. And then he said that the gutsy call on 4th and 2, where Alabama scored the go-ahead touchdown, was enough for them to move up. If you're confused by that, you're certainly not alone. You know why? Because it's all a lie. None of what he said is the real reason why Alabama moved up over Notre Dame. Here's why they did, okay? They moved Alabama ahead of Notre Dame because they needed to create some cushion to keep Alabama in the field, even if they end up losing the SEC championship game on Saturday and BYU won. That's it, okay? Because think about that scenario. Let's say they kept Alabama at 10, and then BYU ends up winning the Big 12. Well, would they then drop Alabama out of the college football playoff and then put BYU there? That would make sense in that moment, right? Because why would you drop Notre Dame from the 9 spot completely out of the playoff when they weren't even playing a game and then keeping a team that lost that weekend? Well, they didn't want to have to deal with that scenario. So what they did was they moved Alabama from 10 to number 9 so that if BYU does win on Saturday, they would take Notre Dame's spot, who is not going to be playing at all on Saturday because they're not in a conference championship. And the betting markets actually predicted this. We were talking about it in some group chats going into the day because Bama was minus 2,000 on FanDuel to make the college football playoff. But meanwhile, Notre Dame was minus 400. And that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because Notre Dame had been ranked ahead of Alabama for the past few weeks. So people started to predict, hey, I think the committee is going to switch these two teams to avoid that scenario where a Bama loss and a BYU win would then complicate the situation. They'd have to put in Bama. So it makes no sense given what happened on the field Saturday because Alabama went out and they took a 17-0 lead, but then they nearly blew the game. And Auburn, who, by the way, finished with 5 total wins this year, almost came back and won. So if you're using that as justification to jump Notre Dame after Notre Dame went to Stanford and they just pounded them, that doesn't make any sense. So he said all that. It wasn't a shock to us, but I guess the explanation was a little bit predictable. The concern I have has to do with his response when then Reese Davis pressed him about whether Notre Dame or Miami could move, considering both teams don't play this week. And he said, quote, teams that are idle can move up or down, end quote. And he said that they re-rank the top 25 every single week, which leads you to believe that they could, in theory, swap Notre Dame and Miami, even though neither team is playing this weekend, and Notre Dame has been ranked ahead of Miami for weeks. So I saw some people say, well, the Notre Dame-Miami debate is over. I don't think it is. Now, if you're looking for an extra data point, Notre Dame's strength of schedule could get a boost if Boise State ends up winning the Mountain West Championship on Saturday. None of the teams that Miami played this season are going to play on Saturday, so their resume is done. Maybe Notre Dame gets that little boost if Boise State wins, although let's be honest here. That is not going to have any real bearing. They might point to that, but that is not going to be the deciding factor between Notre Dame and Miami. But it does leave the door open to Miami jumping Notre Dame, despite the fact that neither team plays this weekend, because let's say BYU does lose, right? And then Miami jumps them. Now all of a sudden you've got Notre Dame at 10 and Miami at 11 for the last spot in the college football playoff. And because of what the committee said after or during the show, they have put themselves in a lose-lose situation because if this happens, right, if BYU ends up losing and they decide to drop them, so it's Notre Dame and Miami for that 11 spot, well, if they pick Notre Dame, then they're going to have to deal with all the people complaining about the fact that head-to-head was not the tiebreaker. But if they decide at the last second to then flip Miami over Notre Dame, then they have to explain why they made that decision when both teams weren't playing and one team had been ranked ahead of them for over a month, and they had given us no reason to switch them. So at this point, they're just kind of saying things. Like none of it really makes sense, but they're trying to, prevent themselves from being binded to anything. So look, it's a mess right now. It really is. And it's a really unfortunate circumstance for the people in the committee because they have to make some really tough decisions. I understand that, but Hunter Yurachek going out there is not helping at all because it's just leading to more questions. Because if they do decide to flip Miami at the 11th hour, it wouldn't make any sense. Because they've said before, they've said this entire time, they think Notre Dame is a better team. If Notre Dame is a better team today, which they clearly believe because they have Notre Dame ranked at number 10 and Miami at number 12, there is nothing that's going to happen this weekend that should change their mind. But they're leaving the door open. So what is going to happen this weekend? Notre Dame's playoff hopes now come down to one game. It's the Big 12 championship. If BYU wins the Big 12 championship, Notre Dame is out of the playoff because BYU gets that automatic qualifier as a conference champion, and they would push Notre Dame out of the 12-team field. There is no wiggle room. If BYU wins on Saturday against Texas Tech, the Irish are done. Now, the good thing is for Notre Dame fans, Texas Tech and BYU have already played this season. Texas Tech won that game 29-7. They should have won by a lot more because they absolutely dominated that game from start to finish. But it's hard to beat a good team twice. I think BYU is a pretty good team. So if BYU ends up losing on Saturday, Texas Tech is able to beat them for the second time in a row. Notre Dame should, in theory, stay right where they are, safely inside the field at number 10, one spot ahead of Bama. That would mean a first-round trip to College Station to take on Texas A&M. But Alabama's situation makes this murky because they seem like they're a lock at number 9. And we know that the committee doesn't want to penalize teams for losing their conference championship. So let's apply that same logic to the Big 12. If Alabama goes out there and they lose a tight game to Georgia, they probably shouldn't move, right? Or if they do, they should just drop to 10 because Alabama's already beaten Georgia this year. They did it on the road in Athens. But what happens if they get blown out? That could complicate some things, right? I think in that case, if Georgia goes out there, they win by 30, Notre Dame should jump up to number 9, but we don't know. And as Pete Sampson pointed out, if we can all accept that Alabama is not going to move down whether they win or lose, why aren't we applying the same logic to BYU? If they end up losing to Texas Tech on Saturday, why would they move down and then create a situation where the committee has to decide between Notre Dame and Miami at 10 or 11? Because right now, Miami is at number 12. The obvious answer is because they respect the SEC more than they do the Big 12. You would hope that they would apply the same logic because if it works out like that, if Alabama ends up losing a close game, which is what they are projected to do, right now Georgia is 2.5-point favorites, and then BYU goes out there and they lose to Texas Tech, I don't think anything should change. Notre Dame should be in at 10, BYU should stay at 11, and Miami should stay at 12. So then we don't have to deal with a situation where the committee has to decide between Notre Dame and Miami in that last spot at number 10. So that is still up in the air. We didn't really get any clarity from the College Football Playoff Committee tonight, which I guess I shouldn't be too surprised at this point. They say a whole lot of nothing when they go out there and they do these things and they get these softball questions. We still don't really have that many answers. But where the field stands going into conference championship weekend, teams ranked 1 through 8 are definitely in. The only drama there is seeding. I think Alabama is in at number 9. They could potentially move up if they end up beating Georgia on Saturday. If they get pummeled, maybe they could drop to number 10. I guess we'll have to see. And there is Notre Dame, the final at-large team, waiting on one result, maybe two. And then you've got two other spots that are undecided at the moment. You know the highest-ranked Group of 5 champion is going to take one of those spots. But now the ACC champion and their spot is a little bit up in the air because if Virginia loses to Duke, Duke would be the ACC champion with a 7-5 regular season record. But the problem is there is nothing in the college football playoff criteria that says it has to be a Power 4 team. It's just the highest ranked conference champions, the 5 highest ranked. If Duke wins the ACC, they're not going to be ranked. So then you could have a situation where there's 2 Group of 5 conference champions getting in the 12-team college football playoff. It is a mess. It really is, going to the last Saturday of the season. But Notre Dame, as we sit here today, is in. And for Notre Dame fans, it's real simple. You need Texas Tech to beat BYU this weekend. Notre Dame's season is on the line in the Big 12 championship. If the Red Raiders win, I think the Irish are probably going to be in. I'm hopeful. It's not a guarantee because that Miami situation is lurking, but we know for sure that if BYU wins, the Irish are out. If Alabama wins, maybe it complicates things. So I guess the best case scenario for Notre Dame is if Georgia wins by 30, so then the Irish move up to number 9, and they are no longer on the cut line. But all that's left to do now is sit back, wait, and become the biggest Texas Tech and become the biggest Georgia fans on the planet this Saturday. All right, that's what the committee thinks. And coming up next, I'm going to reveal my personal top 12 and explain where I think the committee nailed it and where they completely missed the mark. That's coming up next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight, every moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Their live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up, and you can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. Remember when Michigan took an early lead on Saturday against Ohio State, and then the Buckeyes ended up rolling the rest of the way? Well, when Michigan took that early lead, that could have been the perfect time to jump in and place a live bet. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Welcome back to this live edition of Locked On Irish. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak, and thanks again to everyone who's tuning in as we react to the penultimate CFP rankings where the Irish come in at number 10. And thanks to your support, the Locked On Podcast Network is now the number one sports podcast network, and we really do appreciate it. So now that we have a clearer picture of Notre Dame's playoff fate, let's talk about how the committee ranked these teams and where I agree and where I disagree. So this is how I would have stacked the top 12. I would have kept Ohio State at 1, Indiana 2, Georgia 3, Texas Tech 4. I think those four teams have separated themselves later on in the year. I put Oregon at 5. I would have had Texas A&M at 6 instead of Ole Miss. Ole Miss doesn't have a head coach. Lane Kiffin is now at LSU, and I love how they just basically kind of threw Ole Miss a bone and they gave him back Charlie Weiss Jr. to call the plays in the college football playoff. I don't think that's going to make that big of a difference, but they gave him that. I don't really think it's going to change anything. I think Ole Miss is really up against it in the college football playoff, but that's how they have it right now. And then I would have Notre Dame at number 8. I think they're better than Alabama. I think they're better than Oklahoma. But I would have Alabama at number 9, and I would have Miami at number 10, ahead of Oklahoma, where I'd have Oklahoma at 11, and then BYU at 12. So for all this conversation about Notre Dame and Miami and Alabama, right? Why is nobody talking about Oklahoma? Like, why are they a lock to make the college football playoff? And they are. At this point, they're ranked number 8. They are in the college football playoff. They are also not a very good football team right now. If you watched that LSU-Oklahoma game on Saturday, which I'm sure a lot of you did, because if LSU had won that game, it would have put Notre Dame in a much more comfortable position in the college football playoff. Find me one person who is not an Oklahoma fan who watched that game and said, you know what? This Oklahoma team can win a national championship. There's not a single rational human being that would say that. And look, Oklahoma has an elite defense. There is no doubt about it. Their head coach, Brent Venables, is one of the best defensive minds in all of college football, you could argue, at any level. So their defense is great. And yes, they're 10-2. But that unit on defense is the only reason they have made it this far. They have one of the worst offenses in the Power 4 right now. They could not move the ball whatsoever against an LSU team who fired their head coach and has basically given up on the season. John Mateer, the Oklahoma quarterback, who I actually loved to watch at the beginning of the year, but ever since he got hurt, he has not been the same guy. And right now, Oklahoma is 52nd in the country in SP Plus offensive ranking, which is a metric the committee uses every single week. And they have zero chance of making any sort of run in the college football playoff with that offense. Again, elite defense, below average offense, and you are not going to do anything in the college football playoff when you are that imbalanced. And when you look deeper, I think their resume is propped up by teams we assumed would be good at the start of the season, but didn't end up being that good. We talked about this with Luke Smith on the show yesterday. Like, at the beginning of the season, if you said Oklahoma is going to finish 10-2, you would have said, wow, how did they do that? They're going through an absolute gauntlet. That's a really impressive feat. But that was under the assumption that Auburn would be a pretty good football team. They finished 5-7. South Carolina had high expectations going into the season. They were awful. Missouri fell short of their expectations. They were a borderline top 10 team. Now they're borderline top 25. Tennessee, 8-4. And even Michigan, yeah, they finished 9-3, but anyone who's watching Michigan this year knows that they also don't have a very good offense. So all of those teams that I just mentioned massively underachieved relative to their expectations. And yeah, they got that win over Alabama on the road a couple weeks ago. They deserve credit for that. But can we admit that was one of the flukiest wins I've ever seen? They had 212 yards of total offense in that game. They set a record for the fewest yards of total offense in a win. Their expected win percentage was like 5%. So they deserve credit. The results on the field should matter. But if the goal of the 12-team playoff is to get teams who can actually win the championship, Oklahoma is not one of them. They are plus 6,000 to win the national championship right now on FanDuel. Miami is right behind them, and they are basically out of the college football playoff. So a team who kind of needs like a miracle to even make it in has slightly worse odds than Oklahoma, who is considered a lock to make the college football playoff. So I don't understand that. I also don't understand how Ole Miss, who, again, their head coach just left, they have significantly better odds than Oklahoma. I agree that Ole Miss is a better team. They have a better chance of making a run here in the college football playoff, but I don't understand why Oklahoma is a lock at this point. You want to argue resume? Well, like the committee is clearly picking and choosing what matters to them anyway. Because Notre Dame passes the eye test, they're not really looking at much as the resume when you look at like strength of record, best win, and all that stuff. But apparently it really matters with Oklahoma. And frankly, I just don't get it. Like, I would love for Notre Dame to play Oklahoma in the first round because I think Notre Dame would win by 2 touchdowns, even if the game is in Norman. And you know who I think should be in over Oklahoma? Obviously Notre Dame. I think Alabama is better than them as well. But I think Miami has a better argument to be in the college football playoff over Oklahoma. Not over Notre Dame, but Miami should be in the ACC championship game. Miami finished in a 5-way tie for second in the ACC at 6-2. In a normal world, they would have a shot to earn their way in. But instead, Duke got in over them because of the 5th tiebreaker that the ACC has decided: conference opponent win percentage. Never mind that Miami and Duke, who are in the same conference, shared just 2 common opponents. And never mind that Duke should have a 3rd conference loss, but they were bailed out on, quite literally, the worst pass interference call I've ever seen on a 4th down play against Clemson earlier this year. If the refs do not throw that flag, which they absolutely should not have done, Duke loses that game. They have a 3rd conference loss. But because of that, they end up scoring. They go for 2. They beat Clemson, so they finished with 2 ACC losses. Also, Virginia had another conference loss to NC State, but for whatever reason, that did not count towards their official record in the ACC. So if you haven't figured this out by now, the ACC is an absolute disaster. So Miami fans, I actually hear you. You're probably not going to hear that a whole lot from a Notre Dame podcast. The problem is you focused all of your attention and all your hate and all your campaigning towards being ranked ahead of Notre Dame, when the real issue is you're getting screwed by your own conference, because any rational human being would agree that Miami, not Duke, should be the team playing for a playoff spot this weekend. And if Miami had just directed all of their energy toward their own conference, I actually think the ACC might have stepped in, because now if Duke wins, the ACC might not have a team in the college football playoff. And that is far more embarrassing than whatever is going on with Notre Dame and Miami. So Miami fans, you have the right to be upset, but aim that anger at the ACC, not the Irish. It's a waste of time. And the funniest thing about all of this, the great irony, I literally just dealt with this a couple hours ago. So I work with this guy, a Miami fan, great dude too. So he's freaking out after the college football playoff rankings get released, and he's like, how is Notre Dame ranked ahead of them? You know, Miami should be in there, blah, 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 head should matter. He's like, you know what, actually, neither one of us should be in. It should be Vanderbilt. I'm like, you're all wrong, dude. None of that makes sense. But he's like, you know what the real problem is? Like, you guys should join a conference. And I was like, hold on, wait a second. So you just got done complaining about how you're getting screwed by your own conference, the ACC, and their just dumb tiebreaker situation. And the solution that you would present to Notre Dame is then to just join that conference full time. I think Notre Dame is good being independent and being removed from all of that. I don't understand why the ACC doesn't just resolve to the college football playoff rankings. That would just seem like the smartest thing to do. If you have a bunch of teams tied at the top with the same amount of losses, and you've got these mega conferences now who have like 18 teams, and it's probably going to be 20 teams in a couple of years, where it's so hard to even compare the 2 resumes because the schedules are so imbalanced and all of that. Like, if that's the case, why don't you just leave it up to the College Football Playoff Committee? That would have made way more sense. And I think that if they really started campaigning about this for weeks at the ACC, I think Jim Phillips and the conference might have stepped in and said, you know what? We know how the rules are lined up right now, but we can't have a situation where Duke, a 7-5 team, ends up winning the conference and then the entire conference misses out in the college football playoff entirely. Would they have gotten a lot of pushback on that from Duke fans? Yeah, they would have. But most people would have been like, that's kind of messed up that they did that. But you know what? In the end, they got the right team in the college football playoff, because I think if Miami made the conference championship game, they would win, and then they wouldn't have to deal with all of this. So look, again, I understand it, Miami fans, but your complaints, all of this has been directed the wrong way. It should not have been with Notre Dame. I think Miami, yes, obviously they get the head-to-head in week 1 of the season, but I think Notre Dame is a better team today. Notre Dame has a better chance of winning a national championship. But if they could just win their conference, which is a pretty terrible conference, they wouldn't be in this situation at all. If they had not, if Carson Beck had not thrown 4 interceptions against Louisville, if they didn't just blow it against SMU, who, by the way, just lost to a Cal team this past weekend without their head coach, it would be a different situation. But that is the reality. Other than that, I think the committee got most of it right. I think they've done a really good job all year ranking teams. They value the eye test. They have smart football minds in the room. And I think Notre Dame should be ahead of Alabama. I think their biggest mistake is that they've got Oklahoma at 8. That just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think the ACC made a potentially fatal mistake with how they have handled these tiebreakers. And now here you are being in the situation where you might not even have a team make the college football playoff, who's clearly the best team in your conference, because even the biggest Miami haters at this point, I'm sure there are plenty of them, because Miami fans have been, a tough hang as of late. I think we can all admit they're the best team in the ACC. They should have a shot to win that conference, but due to their own fault and the fault of the conference, they might be on the outside looking in on Selection Sunday. But unfortunately for the college football playoff committee and everyone else, they have to make some tough decisions here. Things did not play out on the field the way they normally do, and now they're being forced to make some tough decisions between teams who all have a solid case to make the college football playoff. And lately, those decisions have turned the last few days of college football discourse into an absolute nightmare, and that's where we're headed right after this. All right, welcome back to this live edition of Locked On Irish. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak, and as we continue with our full reaction to the latest college football playoff rankings, Notre Dame dropped to number 10. They were number 9 for the last 3 weeks. They are now at number 10, so technically they are still in the college football playoff as we sit here today, but they need some things to happen for them this weekend. The bracket is starting to take shape, and conference championship weekend is just a few days away. So we've broken down the rankings. We've looked at the scenarios. We've talked about what the college football playoff committee chairman had to say. And now I want to step back for a second, because what's been happening around the sport as of late has gone way beyond the top 12, and it has become just really difficult to deal with, not just for Notre Dame fans, but for all college football fans. And one thing that has always amused me about the college football playoff era is how angry people get, especially in November, about these weekly rankings. And this goes back to 2014 with the 4-team format. Fans would lose their minds in November over rankings that didn't really matter. And for almost a decade, it was pretty funny, because the sport usually handled things for the committee. Like, the Final Four almost always sorted itself out. You could make the case in the first year of the college football playoff committee that there was a legitimate debate between TCU and Ohio State, which team should get in. But then Ohio State got in, and then they won the national championship. They beat Alabama, and then they beat Oregon. So the committee probably felt pretty vindicated in that moment, and they rarely had to make a truly tough call on Selection Sunday up until 2023. Coincidentally, the last year of the 4-team college football playoff. That was the first time they really faced an impossible choice. Undefeated Florida State without their starting quarterback and Heisman Trophy candidate Jordan Travis, or a one-loss Alabama team after they just won the SEC and they had knocked off a Georgia team who had been undefeated prior to that game. Neither answer was satisfying, and it became the most controversial decision in the CFP history, the short history that it may be, but still extremely controversial. And I remember when that was all going down, the Florida State fans were freaking out. Everyone was freaking out. Personally, I think they probably made the right call, but I also totally feel for Florida State fans in that situation, for them to go undefeated in a Power 4 conference and not make the national championship, or not make the college football playoff to earn the right to play for a national championship, is devastating. Fast forward to this year, And the committee is stuck yet again. This time they have to try to separate a cluster of 10-2 teams with wildly different resumes. Last year, it was teams like Alabama and South Carolina who got left out. They complained, but they also had 3 losses. And Alabama lost to a really bad Oklahoma team late in the year. So their arguments weren't really taken that seriously, and at least not to me. But this year, you've got Oklahoma, you've got Alabama, you've got Notre Dame, you've got Miami, you've got Vanderbilt, you've got BYU, you've got Texas and Steve Sarkisian doing his campaigning after they lost 3 games in the regular season. But if we're being honest here, every single team I just mentioned has a real case, and the discourse has spiraled out of control. Like, this is year 2 of the 12-team college football playoff, and somehow the conversation around the entire sport feels like it has gotten uglier than ever. And that's ironic because expansion to the 12-team playoff was supposed to reduce some of this chaos and resentment, not amplify it, but that is where we are today. And it's going to continue over the course of the next week, and then even beyond Election Sunday, we're still probably going to be dealing with it all the way up until the games start, and then people are going to continue to argue after the results play out on the field. And let me be clear, I don't blame fans for being upset if their team gets left out. If Notre Dame were in Miami's position, if they were in Vanderbilt's position, we would be furious too. That's normal. Fans care, and that's good. What isn't good is the media environment around all this. It's been nauseating. There are people with clear biases using their platforms to lobby. You've got coaches begging publicly, conferences running PR campaigns, wink, wink, ACC. And now you've got politicians getting in the mix. I'm not going to dive too into that, but there were some comments made on Tuesday from some politicians about the college football playoff and their decisions. There's also media members who are pushing agendas for either their alma mater or their employer, and it's all just performative, and it's exhausting. And somehow, Notre Dame has been dragged to the center of all of it, even though the Irish are 10-2, playing like a top 5 team in the country, and are clearly capable of winning a national championship. But this level of vitriol from fan bases who don't really have any reason to be mad at Notre Dame is bizarre. Like Miami fans, for example, I just told you should be furious at the ACC, your own conference. Their tiebreaker system is broken. If they fixed that, you would be in. You wouldn't even have to deal with the Notre Dame debate. But for whatever reason, it's all mad at Notre Dame. And all this nuance gets lost in the noise. The real problem here, and this was what I said before we even expanded the 12-team playoff, because I didn't really think that we needed to. I was anti-expansion. I like it. I like how it turned out last year. I think it should stay at 12. But the idea that the 12-team playoff was going to be a magic fix was never accurate. Expansion did not solve the outrage. It just pushed the arguments lower in the rankings. And now you've got even more teams who feel entitled to a spot. More fan bases feel cheated. More conferences feel defensive. And the committee still has to make subjective calls that leave someone angry. And this year is a perfect example of what happens when the games don't naturally sort things out. In the past, they often did. But now, in this age of conference expansion where you've got these mega conferences with 18 teams who don't even play half the teams in their own conference, it's really hard to compare these teams. There's too many borderline resumes, too many flawed contenders, and too many leagues who are cannibalizing themselves, and the fallout has been ugly. The lobbying, the PR, the conspiracy theories, the personal attacks, it's all of a symptom of a deeper issue. The truth is, what happens on Saturday in the conference championships is not going to fix anything. And I don't think expansion to 16 is going to fix anything either, because then you're just going to shift the outrage to teams who are ranked 17th and 18th and 19th, who probably have 4 losses and in reality aren't that good. But we're going to continue to deal with it because none of this addresses the root cause, conference realignment. We reshaped the entire sport for television money, not competitive logic. And now you have these unbalanced leagues, you have these unfair schedules, broken tiebreakers, and teams being judged on resumes that don't resemble each other at all. The committee is trying to compare things that cannot be compared. I don't have a perfect solution. Honestly, I'm not sure one exists because fixing this would require undoing conference realignment, which is obviously never going to happen. So all I can say is I love college football. We all love college football. That's why we're here. But weeks like this show the sport is still in a really strange place, despite the surge in popularity. And I still love the sport, but man, this has not been a whole lot of fun. It has not been a great time to be a college football fan. And that's unfortunate because it should be the best time of the year with rivalry weekend and the conference championships and the playoffs on the horizon. So unless we acknowledge The problems in the sport are structural, not just the committee messed up. This cycle is going to repeat every December, no matter how big the college football playoff gets. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. We covered a lot today. Thank you so much for tuning in, whether you joined us live on Tuesday night or if this was your first watch or listen of the day on Wednesday. If you have not already, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to send in your questions for Friday's mailbag in the YouTube comments or on X at Locked On Irish or by DMing me on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. We're going to talk a lot more about the college football playoff and everything that's on the line this weekend on Friday in that mailbag. But I'm going to be back on Thursday for a special signing day edition of the show because, believe it or not, Wednesday, potentially today, if you're tuning into this tomorrow morning, is signing day, and Notre Dame is set to lock in a top 5 recruiting class. The college football playoff, the whole calendar is a mess, and now you have signing day in the middle of all of this, but that's the reality. We're going to talk about signing day because this class of 2026 is really special for Notre Dame. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'll see you then.